We are opening another webinar of the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security. When we decided to hold it late on Thursday, the situation was a certain situation. Now that we are holding it, the situation is a little bit different. Things happen here so fast that you cannot plan anything. But still, there are some things that remain in place, like the plan of President Trump and the fact that Hamas doesn't want to disarm, and that it is still a terror organization, as we saw today with the attack in Rafah and other attacks in Gaza Strip. So there's a lot to discuss when we are talking about the situation in Gaza. And we are asking ourselves what's going to happen in Gaza following the Trump plan. I'm Brigadier General retired Yossi Kuperwasser. I'm the head of the Jerusalem Institute. And with me, we have three of our experts. Dr. Eran Lerman, who is the deputy head of the institute, and also used to be the deputy director of the National Security Council for International Affairs and Foreign Policy, and teaches at the Shalem College and does a lot of other things that I'm not going to spend all the webinar describing his deeds. Advocate Yifa Segal is also a research fellow at the Institute. She specializes in legal affairs. She was the head of the Israeli Legal Forum and held many other positions that deal with legal issues. Amongst others, she was the head or director of the United Kingdom law firm for Israel, and used to be also the assistant, the head of the mission of the Israeli embassy in the United States, and many other things. But let me remind her of one thing that is relevant to this meeting. This is that we wrote together a paper about what needs to happen in Gaza in the day after, somewhere in December 2023. That nowadays we look at the Trump plan and say, where did he copy it from? Okay, and by the way, Eran also was involved in writing a similar paper that looked not the same, but also has a lot of things in common with the Trump's plan. And finally, we're happy to have with us also Dr. Eytan Cohen Yanarocak. Do I pronounce it correctly? Yanarocak. Dr. Yanarocak is our expert on Turkey, or should we say Turkey, to be precise. Of course, the Turks have played a major role in reaching the ceasefire and the deal that Trump is responsible for. And they are deeply involved in what's happening now in Gaza. We want to look at this angle as well. So let us start with Eran, that will describe what's happening right now in the Gaza Strip and what is about to happen and what Israel needs to do with this in mind. Please, Eran.
Well, clearly the question right now is whether the infringements of the ceasefire by terrorist elements in Gaza, which Hamas claims was very doubtful validity, that they were not related to the Hamas structure, or at least were not acting under orders. Whether these infringements, to which Israel has responded quite forcefully, will lead to the collapse of the ceasefire, or will turn out to be a temporary hitch, another temporary hitch on the road to the implementation of the what is now referred to as the 20-point plan, the American plan, or I would prefer the term framework, because it is far from being a detailed plan at this stage. And I would venture the guess that with the Qataris and the Turks being warned by the Trump administration that Hamas infringements will meet with very severe consequences, and we're talking not only about attacks on Israel, but also an American warning, a significant American warning about Hamas attacks and reprisals against Gaza people in Gaza, that they would find a way to bring the process that began with the meeting in New York between Trump and 8 Muslim leaders, went on to a meeting with Netanyahu, attended by a Qatari envoy, and then the event in which Israel signed on to the plan, and then Trump's visit in the Knesset, speech in the Knesset, and the release of the hostages, which is perhaps the most significant and dramatic change not only in terms of how the Israeli public feels about events, but also in strategic terms, because there's now no constraint on the IDF, on the Israeli Air Force actually, striking targets in Gaza that until now sometimes were off limits because of the fear for the lives of the remaining 20 hostages. All of this has changed. And then we had the Sharm el-Sheikh summit. There is a significant momentum towards strategic change in Gaza. And the question is will Hamas manage to derail this project that the Americans have put together? Or will the administration be able to retrieve the position that they have worked fairly hard to create? And it's a significant effort, because the Americans have been able, in a sense, to bring together two very different elements in the Muslim world, in the Arab regional balance, and even in the broader sense. Those who are committed to regional stability, who are very suspicious of Islamist, totalitarian variations of politics, like Egypt and Jordan, Saudi Arabia, the Emiratis, Indonesia further afield, which is dominated politically and ideologically by a very moderate version of Islam under the Nahdlatul Ulama, and on these five on one hand, but also Qatar, Turkey, and to some extent Pakistan, which is a problematic player in many respects. All of these 8 came around to support the position that Trump enunciated, which is in itself a fairly dramatic development, because the first paragraph or the first point of the 20 points actually speaks about Hamas being disarmed, that they will no longer not only be driven out of political power in Gaza, but also would be obliged to lay down their arms and essentially hand over Gaza, maybe in a modular fashion, over to what has been referred to as the Gaza International Transitional Authority, or GITA, or JITA, as you wish to. The name of Tony Blair has been mentioned. The ideas about various elements coming in, bringing military force, administrative capabilities, and so on. All of this is part of the plan. But Hamas, of course, has reacted by essentially conceding the first stage, the release of the living hostages. It's dragging its feet on the release of the remaining bodies still held in Gaza, including one which has been held now for 11 years, which Israel strongly believes that Hamas knows where they are, or where most of them are, and are using this essentially to derail and drag out the implementation of the plan. But at the end of the day, Israel does have a number of key assets. And if it uses them wisely in the next phase, it can drive others with it towards the implementation, as I said, possibly modular implementation of the Trump plan. The first asset is American support. Trump has been very clear never again. That's not just a phrase referring to the Holocaust, but in the specific context of the 7th of October. Israel would never be asked again to be exposed to anything like what happened on the 7th of October. Hence, the American position on Israel retaining more than 50% of the Gaza Strip at this stage of the process, which is a very far-reaching change from what Hamas has been demanding in the past. The second asset is, as I said, this control, Israeli control of most of the territory of the Gaza Strip, and the capacity to increase this control if the ceasefire disintegrates. And the third is the Israeli control over the crossings, which enables Israel, if it acts in a consistent fashion, to make sure that the reconstruction of Gaza, not humanitarian aid, that's off the table. Israel will allow trucks to go in with food and medicine. It has suffered a major setback internationally when it tried, when it found itself in a situation where it tried to manage the humanitarian aid in a different fashion, and found itself accused of causing deliberate starvation. This is not the tool of policy. But control over the crossings means that Israel can prevent the reconstruction of Gaza until the point in which Hamas actually does lay down its arms and gives out, hands over governance in Gaza to an alternative and creating an alternative reality there. And I think this is clearly implied in sufficiently implied in the text, basic text of the Trump points, but it does require a much more elaborate and systematic Israeli plan, if you wish, or elaboration on the American plan to make sure that this is the case. And one final point, which I think needs to be put in place, and that is also in reference both to the structure, and perhaps Advocate Segal will refer to this, the legal structure of handing over, but also to the politics of the next phase. And this also refers clearly has to do with the issues under Dr. Eytan Yanarocak's purview. It is absolutely vital for Israel to ensure that military forces that belong to countries that are clearly committed to Islamist variations of Islamist politics, like Erdogan's Turkey or Turkey and the Qataris, will not be able to control aspects of Israeli national security by establishing a presence in Gaza. They can contribute to the reconstruction effort under the conditions I mentioned previously. But I think that it would constitute a breach of Israeli national security if significant Turkish military presence would be established in Gaza. The Qataris do not have a military to speak of in that context, but it is essentially a Turkish question. And we are on delicate ground here because there are in Washington strong sympathizers of both Turkey and Qatar. I don't want to go into names and internal dynamics within the administration. I'm sure that not everybody is in that category, but there are some such significant influences, and Israel needs to be on its guard. The Americans certainly intend to manage the next phase. Central Command has already assigned a significant contingent, not for service in Gaza itself. There will be no American boots on the ground in the Gaza Strip, But in the envelope of logistical, administrative, intelligence, command support structures that would support this effort from outside. And they also need to be under no misapprehension about what Israel will and can or cannot agree to. Azeri troops, Indonesians, perhaps others from around the world. That Israel, I think, has probably already indicated that it is willing to see them there. The Saudis, the Emiratis, the Egyptians, well, I'll say this very carefully, they know Gaza very well, but I doubt if they want to be drawn into it, and Israel has to be wary of the implications of having a continuous Egyptian presence going from Sinai into Gaza. But all of this requires, and this is the final point, an firm Israeli position, either as an overt or as a discreet partner in the work of what President Trump has called the Board of Peace, which he himself is supposed to be the chairman of, namely the international control group that would govern the work that will be done in Gaza. Israel must have a veto on the crucial aspects of this project for the war to actually be brought to the right conclusion rather than something that would undermine stability in the region for years to come.
Okay, I have some questions to that, but we'll come back to that maybe if I will address some of these questions. What do you think about what's going on?
Let me just share with you that a colleague from Europe called me today and he said, "Are you surprised that Hamas broke the ceasefire?" And I said, yes, of course. I was as surprised as I was this morning when I woke up to see that the sun came up. So I think, we all know Hamas and we all know the Palestinians, and this is something that we anticipated. I wasn't sure when, at what stage they will decide to breach the agreement, or how egregious it will be, how obvious it will be. Unfortunately, they've decided to breach their part of the agreement very, very soon, very fast. They haven't even completed, the first article of the agreement, which was they were supposed to give back all the hostages. And as we know, unfortunately, there are still 18 families waiting to bring their loved ones to a proper burial. And we all hope that will happen very, very soon. But Yossi, I want to bring you back to, I think what kind of led us in our thinking back in December 2023, as you pointed out in the beginning. And what we wanted to create was a reality in Gaza that would create a chance, at least, that will change. Let's say that what was in Gaza will not necessarily have to be what the future holds for Gaza. That maybe we can create a chance for de-radicalization, even if it takes 20, 25 years or longer. At least there's a positive horizon for Israelis, for Gazans, and for the entire region. And that is what led us in our thinking. And so I want to address, if it's okay with you, three things. First of all, I want to address, first thing that is written in the 20 points addresses the issue of de-radicalization in the Gaza Strip. And afterwards, they also talk about how Gaza will now be ruled by other elements. First of all, technocrats. And then, of course, they discuss another pipe dream, if you ask my humble opinion, about a reform in the Palestinian Authority. We've seen that before. We see the Palestinians, move the pay-for-play payments from this bank account to another bank account, and they go to the Europeans and they say, "Look, we stopped pay-for-play," and everyone, of course, are more than eager to buy everything that they're selling. But we've been down that road before, and I personally don't believe that the Palestinian Authority can reform to a level that will change the essence of their self-determination as a group, which is to annihilate the state of Israel, which is number one priority, both for Hamas and the Palestinian Authority as well, in perhaps different ways, different methods, but same agenda unfortunately, until the bitter end. So I think, first of all, that I understand why the framework, as Dr. Lerman called it, the agreement doesn't go into details, and I understand why it was created this way, why it's only a framework, and now the real work has to be done to put important details into that. And I think we have to be very, very active on this issue of describing in great details what it means a reformed PA. I mean, again, I don't believe that will ever happen, but at least it has to be very clear what we see as a minimum requirement. Just as an example, obviously, no more payments of any kind from any bank account to convicted terrorists and their families and dead jihadists and their families. No more squares, town squares, schools, whatever. Streets named after all these cultural heroes, all these murderer terrorists. And there are a bunch of things that I think we can all agree should be a minimum requirement for what it should be considered a legitimate level of reform that we should that we can even discuss further steps. And right now it's not there. The Israeli government or any official Israeli entity haven't published something that we would consider a minimum requirement. First of all, it's important to show our side of the story to the world, but also to kind of say what it is that we want, because later on they will, obviously, look, I think that Trump has much bigger plans, and perhaps the Israeli government is sharing that vision. Like Gaza is just, shutting down the war in Gaza was just like stopping that interruption from happening. I think we can all understand, the agenda of broadening the peace accords, the Abraham Accords, and economic agreements across the region, and a lot of amazing benefits. I understand that, but to safeguard our society, our nation, the communities along the Gaza envelope and the entire population of Israel for the future, we have to make sure at least that we describe the bare minimum that we're willing to tolerate. Second thing that I want to say is it brings me to another issue that I was trying to push later on, and that was to create an alternative. It was something that we already put in writing in our first plan, but then I suggested not just to divide and conquer, not just to create directorates or districts or to divide Gaza into smaller autonomies, perhaps base it on the existing tribes, perhaps not, have some other local leaders that are not necessarily based on a tribal structure everywhere in Gaza or generally in Palestinian society, but to really kind of try something new, give a real chance to transformation, to de-radicalization in the Palestinian society, in the Gazan society, first of all. And also, I think that should be applied to Judea and Samaria. I think now that it's pretty obvious that if the agreement is not collapsing, that it's on its way to collapse, I think it's time to go back to the American team and all the other Arab partners and say, we're with you in terms of the spirit of the agreement. What you want is what we want. What you've described in the 20 points is what we want for Gaza, for the region, for Israel, et cetera, et cetera. But that will not happen if you continue down the path of either allowing Hamas to control the population or aspiring to bring back the PA in any capacity. It's time to think of something new. And the idea, I think, is the best one I've heard yet. And as I said, I've repeated it and tried to kind of modify it recently, is the idea of dividing Gaza into different autonomies and base it mainly on the idea of local tribes. And the third point I would like to make is about the humanitarian issue. So I've published an article with the Institute a few months back when the idea of creating a humanitarian city was raised by the Israeli government, by the IDF, and of course there was a lot of objection. I wrote an article to counter a lot of these. A lot of the criticism, which I think was I thought was completely irrelevant to the situation in Gaza. I also pointed out a few things that for us Israelis, we have to make sure that we abide by. if we want to do this right, if we want to abide by international law. And unfortunately, what the Hamas's reaction was the whole starvation campaign that they have fabricated. But as Dr. Lerman said, it was incredibly successful. It reached every corner of the earth, and the pressure on Israel to kind of backtrack on this idea unfortunately succeeded. I think now is the perfect time to go back to that idea, because any type of criticism that was I didn't think it was relevant then, but obviously it's not relevant now, because you will not evacuate anybody. This will be a voluntary based safe zone in the areas that are still controlled, that the IDF still is present in these areas in Gaza, where you do still have local militias that live there and are still relatively safe from the hostilities, from the violence of Hamas, as we see executions in the streets in the last few days. So I think such an effort, perhaps with the GHF, which have indicated they're willing and able to create such a safe zone, to create such a humanitarian zone. Even back then, I think obviously that's still true now. I think this is a perfect initiative that Israel needs to lead. Humanitarian supply, humanitarian aid will be available in the safe zones, will be available away from the hands of Hamas, will be able to go in freely into the Gaza Strip and into the hands of the Palestinians, and that the Palestinians, the Gazans who want to be free from the chokehold of Hamas are welcome to come and change their lives and be open to everything that we can that this zone can offer them, as we've seen, by the way, in all other conflict zones around the world. So that was my a few points I wanted to make.
And under the assumption, I understand this is under the assumption that Hamas stays in power in the areas that it is governing now.
It's look, I would, as I said, I would be very happy to wake up tomorrow morning and see somehow that what we have anticipated has somehow changed. I don't see that happening. I mean, all we've seen is Hamas making all the efforts to reassert its power. We've seen the demonstration of power in the streets. We've seen the executions. We've seen them declare we're not going to lay down our arms. So I think we should. That's the working assumption. I think that should be the working assumption. And in addition, perhaps parallel to go back to fighting, I think the humanitarian issue should be a priority.
Thank you, Yifa. Hi.
Yes.
What's going to happen with those Turks?
Okay, so I'll give you, a very upside down angle, because from the Turkish point of view, everything is pretty much a diplomatic victory. Actually, approximately a month ago, when we were all talking about Gaza, of course, we were speaking about the United States, Egypt, and of course Qatar, but the Turks were sidelined. However, approximately 2 weeks ago, there was a very important summit in the UN, where Turkish president, together with Donald Trump, co-chaired a very important summit, and there basically they formulated this Trump-Gaza peace offer. Later, we also saw that President Erdogan was hosted by Donald Trump in the White House, and he was crowned as the strong leader, we can say almost of the entire Muslim world. How he was portrayed to the Turkish press, and therefore also according to the agreement that was signed, Turkey appeared as the third important player after Qatar and Egypt, and it turned into a guarantor state. So now, when we are hearing this term, the guarantor state, so what should we understand from that? Do we see some concrete, tangible jurisdictional powers? Actually, not. Everything is very much ambiguous. We even don't know if the Turks will take part in this command force, joint command force in the Gaza Strip or not. But obviously, they are very much interested in sending troops to the Gaza Strip. So, long story short, we are seeing, at least on paper, that Turkey has a say for the first time on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But when an ordinary Turkish citizen is hearing this term, the guarantor state, what he or she understands from it. Of course, when we are looking at the Turkish history, we can obviously can be impressed from the usage of this term in the Cypriot question. In the Cypriot question, when the Cypriot Republic was founded in 1959 with the Zurich Agreement, and the year later, in 1960, the guarantorship agreements were signed between the United Kingdom, Greece, and Turkey. Turkey acquired in its hands something very unprecedented. In case that the status quo in the island was changed, so the Turks or the Greeks or the British could interfere in the affairs of the Cypriot Republic, and they could even use force for it. So in 1974, because of a coup d'etat that took place by the Greeks, the Turks used their rights that derived from this guarantorship agreement. And the rest is history. We all know that since 1974, the northern portion of the island is under Turkish occupation. By the way, the first phase of the occupation was in accordance with the international law, but the second phase, which was launched during the peace talks, obviously put an end to the legitimacy of the Turkish operation, and therefore, according to the international law, the Turkish presence today in Cyprus is considered as an occupation. So, why is it important? Because when the Turkish foreign minister is talking about the guarantor state ship, he means that he wants to acquire the ability to launch a military intervention against the state of Israel in favor of the Palestinians. So that's what should be understood from it. And in addition to that, Israel, in an unofficial way, declared Turkey as a potential threat. We all remember during this year, January, the Nagel report asked the government to see Turkey as a potential threat. But this is not only in Israel. We also saw the same thing in Turkey. October last year, the Turkish parliament made a very important gathering, tagging Israel as a national security threat. And several times, I can provide you many different statements of Erdogan, of Fidan, of any other Turkish officials, including the head of the parliament, various ministers. There's a race going on in Turkey who is going to tag Israel more as a more, national security threat for Turkey. From their perspective, Israel launched this this total war against Hamas, in order to implement its so-called promised land vision. According to this conspiracy theory that it is very much voiced in the Turkish media, Israel started its occupation in Gaza, then in Lebanon, then in Syria, and then later it may even occupy some parts of Turkey. I mean, come on, really, right? But still, there are many different people in Turkey who are buying this. So why is it so important? Because many Turks are nowadays believing that the Turkish penetration in Syria and also the potential Turkish penetration in Gaza would be something required to provide defense for Turkey, because they see themselves as threatened by the state of Israel, whether if it's fabricated or not. Of course, from our perspective, it is very much fabricated. At the end, Turkey has become the first ever Muslim country that recognized the state of Israel in 1949. and we basically are not looking for any other enemies in the region. Of course, this is something fabricated, but unfortunately, many people in Turkey believe in these conspiracy theories because of the fact that they were all mentioned by the president, by the foreign minister himself, and other key officials. So, given this background that Turkey is trying to penetrate into Syria and also trying to have a bridgehead in the Gaza Strip, can we regard Turkey? Can we see Turkey as a constructive partner for peace that Israel could trust? Unfortunately, the answer is no. I wish we could answer this question in a positive way. Maybe 20 years ago, it could be something very, ideal to ask from the Turks to come and station in Gaza. But today, unfortunately, this is a kind of it would be an own goal for Israel if the Israeli government would agree for the station for the deployment of the Turkish soldiers in the Gaza Strip. By the way, Turkey's challenging the state of Israel is not only limited within boundaries of Gaza. Also, we are seeing that Turkey is seeking to deepen its penetration in Syria. They are forming an organization called the Neighbors of Syria, which is composed of Iraq, Turkey, Syria, Lebanon, and Jordan. When you're looking at the map, you can obviously see that this is something like encircling the state of Israel from the north and from the east. And given the Turkish Egyptian close relationship, we can, of course, say that. Also, the Egyptians are considered as potential candidates for being a part of this organization, even if it is portrayed as if it is formed against the ISIS. It's not against the ISIS. It is, in my opinion, a nucleus for a Sunni Muslim NATO-style military partnership, military alliance. So time will tell if they will be able to implement their goals or not. But obviously, we can say that Israel cannot trust Turkey, even if the Turkish President Erdogan is not capable of sitting at the same table together with the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu at the summit in Sharm el-Sheikh, should tell us everything. I mean, according to the Turkish press, Erdogan threatened to make a U-turn back to Ankara if Israeli Prime Minister would would attend to this conference. I mean, isn't it ridiculous that we have seen here a peace conference without Israel? I mean, this everything is about Israel. At one hand, we have Israel, and the other hand, we had a bloody terrorist organization called Hamas. So we keep seeing that the Turkish government is doing its best to launch a delegitimization campaign against the state of Israel. And when we are seeing this delegitimization campaign and its support for Hamas, obviously, from the Israeli perspective, unfortunately, Turkey cannot be trusted anymore as it was before. And therefore, I think the Israeli government, that's why, is not very eager to proceed with the second stage with the second phase of the agreement. We may see the penetration of the Egyptian, Qatari, and the Turkish forces in the Gaza Strip, but of course, first of all, the phase one should be finalized. We still have the dead bodies of our hostages that should be given back to us. And the most important task of this agreement that was initiated by the US president was to bring the demilitarization of Hamas. So, like Yifa Segal said, I'm I'm not buying it. I really do not think that Hamas will voluntarily say that, okay, now I'm going to demilitarize and I'm going to, an exile, a voluntary exile. I'm not buying it. And I really don't think that the Turks, the Qataris, and even the Egyptians would do something that would bring the demilitarization of Hamas. These states would want to see a weaker Israel. These states would like to see that the Israeli budget would go to the security expenditures to an eternal war of attrition in Gaza. From their perspective, keeping Israel busy with Hamas, with Gaza, is much more preferable. Therefore, Israel cannot trust Turkey, Qatar, and Egypt.
So if I understand correctly what you and the Yifa say, it's not clear to me what's Iran's opinion on that, although he mentioned mainly the diplomatic tools as means to create a better situation in Gaza, is that, and this is a question mark, the hovering over the plan from the beginning.
I don't think
We
that
need
the
to,
agreement is sustainable, dear Yossi. I
yeah,
don't
but
think that the agreement is sustainable. I think it would eventually collapse and Israel
right.
would dictate the terms.
So no, my question is that assume is implementing the general plan and turning it into reality, and assuming that Hamas doesn't volunteer to disarm, and assuming that we don't want to see Turkish forces deployed in the Gaza Strip, does that mean that we take the military option that Trump is waving day in, day out, that this is what's going to change the situation in Gaza, now that we have released the 20 living hostages and hopefully may release some more of the deceased bodies,
Yeah.
soldiers' bodies?
The
Or
signal
do
flare.
we focus on what if I alluded to, which is also present in the plan in Article 17, that says that while we wait for Hamas to disarm and while we wait to all kinds of good things to happen, we can start reconstruction in the areas under our control and create two kinds of Gaza, one that is enjoying better life and the beginning of reconstruction, and the other one ruled by Hamas that suffers from lack of normal life and all kinds of other problems. Do we go in this direction or in that direction?
I think that there's nothing more powerful than creating a reality on the ground. If you create change, even in some portions, some parts of Gaza, if you create a positive change, I mean, we need to start declaring new Gazan autonomies in the areas where we are still able to do that, and create a significant humanitarian effort, as I said in the beginning, together with these new entities and the international whoever is interested in, whether it's just the GHF or whoever is interested in participating from the international aid organizations, and start slowly but surely. But if you have a success story, even if just 10% of Gaza, then 20%, then 30%, if you have a success story, if you can actually show that you can change something, there's that there can be a different reality in the Gaza Strip, or at least things starting to change. There is a new type of leadership, a new type of messaging and cooperation that is happening, even if it's just in small parts of the Gaza Strip. Then you have a success story, then you have a model that you can then go to President Trump and to the Arab Gulf states and say, this is what you wanted for the Palestinians, didn't you? You wanted prosperity, you wanted peace, you wanted the cooperation, you wanted coexistence, you wanted de-radicalization, you wanted humanitarian. Here it is. Here it is. You failed in all other models, and we're showing you that this can potentially work in Gaza. And by the way, as I said, and I'm not scared to say it, Gaza first, but then I think it should be implemented in the rest of the Palestinian territories, also in Judea and Samaria. I think we need to start now.
Okay.
I agree that
Yes, Eran.
notion of modular action, in conjunction with whatever the Americans and others are trying to put together in terms of an alternative to Hamas rule, could be the key if Hamas does not quickly disarm. As I said, Israel controls more than 50% of the Gaza Strip. This gives Israel essentially the decisive say as to who comes in, at what pace, and for what purpose.
Yeah, well, we have to say that these 50%, 53% to be exact, of the Gaza Strip are mostly unpopulated. Most of the
Mostly, but
population
not
of Gaza
entirely.
is not entirely, but mostly. And the vast majority of the Gaza population lives in areas that are now controlled by Hamas. And we see what Hamas does in those areas, the way it reasserts its control.
I think that makes it
executions.
easier, by the way, Yossi, I think it makes it easier to create a humanitarian safe zone in an unpopulated area where there are not, hidden weapons of Hamas and entrance of tunnels and influence over populations. I think it actually makes it easier to start with something that you can very easily clear, and it's there is no Hamas influence, there is no way for them to get in and out, there is no weapon arsenals there. And I would start there. Actually, that's not a negative thing. And as I said, even if we start with 10% of the population and we show it's successful, I think it's going to make everything else easier in the future.
Well, in practice, these two options do not exclude each other, but you can do both simultaneously.
No.
But the logic of both of them is different. And one of the elements that brought us to this position where we allowed Hamas to control the population is that we wanted all along the way to avoid an outcome that would mean that we are involved in ruling over the Palestinian population in Gaza.
Mm-hmm.
This idea of civil administration, this idea of military rule was always something that we were really interested to not end up with.
True
And,
enough.
I thought that this approach weakened us and held us back from being able to convince Hamas that they should bring back their hostages. And as a matter of fact, the one thing that made the Hamas change their calculus was mainly the fact that they got the impression that Israel has changed position. It's really ready to take over the Gaza City area and what would lead eventually to Israeli control of the population as well, even though they were moved to the Mawasi and other parts of southern Gaza. But here again, we stand with this dilemma. If we are going to remove Hamas from power by force, as President Trump suggests as one option, and Eytan is in favor, I understand. If we do that, we might end up ruling over Gaza because whether the plan is going to stay in power in place or not is not clear. That is one thing that I think we have to clarify, that if we have to remove Hamas from power by force, we still do it in the context of this framework, as you called it rightfully. And still, once we do that, we expect the international community to assume responsibility together with technocrats and so on and so forth, to the fate of the Palestinians living in Gaza, so that Israel is not going to be directly involved in ruling over those Gazans. That's something very important, because the nice thing about this plan is that it goes along with everything Israel was anticipating to reach in the end of the war. Removing Hamas from power, returning the hostages, making sure that Gaza is not a base for future terror attacks against Israel, and avoiding the need to control over the Palestinian civilians. And,
yes, but there's one exception. Again, in the plan, it says that eventually a reformed Palestinian Authority will rule over Gaza, which, as I said, I think it's a pipe dream, unless no one's willing to really look at a real reform of the Palestinian Authority. Otherwise, it's unsustainable. We will get Hamas, Islamic Jihad, or whatever terror group with a different name at the end of the day, because the structure, the ideology of the population will not change. And I don't trust the Turks or any other of these players currently to make sure that there's really a process of the radicalization. And who's going to collect, the weapons, and who's going to shut down the factories of to create missiles and other types of ammunition? The Turks are going to do that in the Gaza Strip. So I think, I fully agree with you that there's a lot of positive points in the Trump plan, but to me, it's they created a framework, I think, that they knew will not work. And so I think they wanted to launch a deal, work out how to modify it down the road. And it's time for us to go back to making our suggestions. I think that a local Palestinian leadership is the best idea. And by the way, I don't think a civil administration is such a bad alternative. It's definitely better than allowing them to regain control.
We are past that point by now. The Americans have already put together a vision of an alternative which is not Israeli rule. How to get from here to there? Well, that's a question of sequencing, and as I said, possibly modular responses.
I want to emphasize one more point that we sort of missed, and
I
that's
don't know, by the way, if you've seen the reporting is that we've lost 2 soldiers in the fighting.
yes,
today.
I know.
Yeah, in the ceasefire.
Yeah.
This was the
Today?
beginning.
Are we talking
Today,
about
yes.
today?
Yeah.
Yes, this is in the attack in Rafah.
Yeah.
This was
Both of
the
them
reason
from my
for the
town.
entire escalation of the day and the retaliation of Israel, for sure.
Yeah.
But what I wanted to add is that removing Hamas from power has more importance than just making sure that they don't govern Gaza, which is they're not willing to give it up. It has also to do with the question of how this entire 7th of October attack is going to go down in the Palestinian history. And if you follow the Arab media in the last couple of days, ever since the 7th of October, this has become a major issue of debate between Hamas people and the anchors of the Arab media. And they find it very difficult to make the point that we did a good thing. We thought of everything in advance. We just couldn't think that Israel is going to behave the way it did. But part of that, everything was fine. And 7th of October is something that should be glorified, and we should follow it and do many more 7th of October in the future when the time is ripe, after we recover. And I think because of that, it's so important for us to make sure that Hamas is removed from power, one way or another. If we can convince them to give up the power in Gaza through diplomatic means, wonderful. If we can't, we should use power in order to make it happen, so that it would be clear to any Palestinian that 7th of October was a terrible mistake, should never be repeated. And this has become the litmus test of whether this is going to be the way it's going to be remembered or not. Because until now, see the celebrations and the way they are trying to portray the 7th of October as a wonderful day in which they managed to gain a lot of things like Western recognition in the state of Palestine that doesn't exist, and all the international support and the return of terrorists from jail and so on and so forth. So they have their achievements. We cannot ignore them, but we have to make sure that they realize that the price they paid for those achievements is much higher. So first and foremost, they lost a lot of their people. Then the entire Iranian axis has suffered considerably, and in some cases was destroyed. And of course, the Hamas itself and the Palestinians in Gaza paid a heavy price. But still, as long as they stay in power, this price is going to be considered worth the pain. And we should make it sure that this is not the case. That's why we have to insist on Hamas being removed from power one way or another. I hope that this is
But while
still
doing
true.
it, we should also make sure that we should not endanger our national security in the future by paving the way to the Turks and the Egyptians and the Qataris into the Gaza Strip.
For sure, we
I
should
mean,
give much more place in this deal to the people that we can trust.
yes,
First and foremost, the
definitely.
Emiratis. I don't know. I think the Emiratis made a point,
Even
but
Indonesians,
very happy with what's
even
going on.
Indonesians, even Indonesia
Right.
Even
can
Indonesia.
play a
There
role
is,
here.
Yeah, there are
yes,
enough
we should.
countries in the Arab world and the Muslim world that we can trust more than we trust the Turks and the Egyptians and the Qataris. Definitely, and make sure
I
that
want to
they
add,
are
by the way, that
better.
I personally was not so excited to hear that European countries are joining, this initiative. It's unclear right now what the level of their involvement will be in the future. But I'm not so sure. I don't know what you guys think about this. I'm not sure that this is a positive addition to the to the countries who
Quite
govern.
frankly, depends who.
Yeah, and when, who and when, right?
Yes.
Because governments change.
If the Czech
Yes.
Republic is going to be
Yeah, that's
having a
amazing.
role,
That's great.
Hungary, I saw Viktor Orban getting
Unfortunately,
praised
those
by
who are those in Europe who are friendliest to Israel are also those who are most concerned with the Russian threat to the east. So the likelihood that they will volunteer a significant force right now is not very high.
Right.
But one thing is comforting me that these are the same countries that some of them are the same countries that recognize the Palestinian state, and now they are committed to a paper that says Trump plan that says that in the future there might be a path to self-determination of the Palestinians, even statehood. Namely, a paper that clearly says that there is no such state right now. It's something to think about in the future, maybe. So it clarifies that they recognize something that doesn't exist. Not that they don't know that, but
Yeah.
it's comforting a little bit.
But facts don't usually confuse them, though. It's
No,
don't
no.
worry. Don't worry. Yeah.
Okay. I don't think that we have questions from the audience. Anybody has a question, that's the time to write it. If not, we shall call it a day because it's 8 o'clock and we are very punctual. So we are not from a certain country in Europe. We are still punctual. So all the best to our viewers, and we shall put that webinar on our website. And I recommend you all to go to this website full with papers and articles analyzing the situation. And as you can see, all of these issues were discussed in our papers. As a matter of fact, Eran wrote a paper that speaks about what he said today. It's just about to be published.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay.